Alright, so today we're reviewing the Xbox One Elite controller 2 years after it was purchased, right here. We're going to get really in depth with it and really look at all the parts, all the components, and all the construction. So let's get into the injection mold. I know a little bit, and I emphasize a little bit about injection molding. And even at that point, I could make an entire video just on these injection molds. So to start off the molds, let's take a look at LB and RB here. And as we can see, what we've got is a metallized part. Through some process or other, what they've done is they've taken this injection mold and applied a metal coating to it, and then they've sprayed over that metal coating with a finish, and that's what gives it this nice brushed finish. Not particularly great. It scrapes off fairly easily, but I have really no complaints about it. This is exactly the type of metallization you're going to see any parts like this. What's a little bit strange to me is that we see a very definitive line where the metallization has stopped. And generally with any type of metallization process, you'll see almost like it'll look like a spray over the whole thing. Obviously, however they've done this, they put it in some kind of jig, metallized it. I'm going to guess vacuum metallization, but I really have no idea. Taking a look at all the parts present on the outside of the controller here, what you can see is that any of the plastic face that is showing has this sort of finish on it. I can't pinpoint exactly what it is. My guess is that before they inject the plastic in these molds, what they do is they put some kind of material in there, flatten it in there, and then they push the plastic into the mold, fills up the mold, and what you get is a surface finish that just nice like this, and it of course has all these not engravings, but all these markings pre-printed onto it. And that's where we get all of this kind of stuff, just like that. We have no markings on any of these molds that indicate exactly what material this is made out of, but as the old saying goes, is if it looks like shit, it smells like shit, it's probably shit. In this case, feels like ABS, looks like ABS. ABS is pretty much a standard in consumer electronics. It's probably ABS. One real quick thing on this frame. What's a bit interesting is right here and here appear to be our gates. This is where the the plastic is injected into the mold. This is the only part that I could find that has 2 gates on it as opposed to just 1. My guess being just these real complex areas we're using 2 gates, or they're using 2 gates just so they can fill them very specifically. Again, I think this frame is probably the most important part to get just right, as all the parts have to sit on it specifically, all the circuit board components sit on it, and all the buttons and everything. Okay, to me this is actually the most interesting molded piece on the Xbox. First of all, you can see that it's just got an insane amount of detail. Something like this would take a very experienced mold technician, really controlled environment. What's strange to me here, we can see some texture just right in here. Not sure what that's doing there, not sure what it's for, but it's something I noted. Up here we can also see texture, but this is unintentional. It appears to be maybe left there from some kind of mold release or something like that. We've got witness marks spattered throughout this, the inside of this thing. Nothing surprising about that. It's a multi-shot mold, so that's how you get these elastomer shots over the rigid plastic. In this case, the rigid plastic would be referred to as a substrate. At first when I saw this, I thought it was a common cavity, but it appears that, or a common core, excuse me, but it appears that this side is actually the cavity side, and this side, this finished side here, is the core. If nothing else, because we see labeling here that says CAV 3-2, CAV likely standing for cavity. That's probably to track defects in the tooling, things like that. These are not going to be cheap parts. They're expensive. The tooling for these is expensive. It needs to be replaced, repaired, maintained often. That being said, it's not perfect. If we turn it over here, we can see the gate right here in the battery compartment. This is where the substrate will be shot into the first mold, and what's going to happen is a robot in some fashion or other take this out of the mold, put it in a completely different mold, and then it appears right here we have the gates for our elastomer material, and they'd be shot in right there and there. Other things to mention, of course, people all seeming to have problems with these. If you don't have a problem now, you will. This seems to be bonded just by some kind of chemical compound This right here is actually epoxy that I put on there, so don't worry about all this nasty stuff right here. That's all from me. What we can see is just shot right onto this flat face of this molded piece. What you'd really want to see with something like this, something that's going to be held in your hand, something that's going to get grease from your hand. You know, we're going to be playing video games, eating handfuls of Doritos, whatever. It's going to get grease in there. What you'd really like to see is something like this. Again, this is appears to be the gate, but we'd like to see holes spattered throughout the inside of this so that the plastic could seep up into those holes. It would allow it to grip onto this case really tight, and so it would just have really good adhesion with this substrate. Okay, so let's have a look at some of the electronics in here. So we can see these two boards. What this is a little PCB that goes in the bottom shell of the controller. It's like right here. You'll set something like that. And this has just these real small, just these real small tack switches, 4 on there. Those are for each of the paddles, of course. It's a good looking PCB. I have no problems with that. What I like about here, they just have a nice ribbon cable that plugs in right there, that nice low profile connector. And again, we take a look at this board, and you know, it's a really good looking board in all likelihood because of this specificity of some of these electronic components. This is why we're looking at, you know, such a nice board construction. Again, we kind of follow this theme of a penny scrape throughout this thing, so anywhere Microsoft seems to be able to save any kind of money whatsoever, they do so, and this is not a cheap part. Analog sticks, I've heard some people complain about the analog sticks on these Xbox One Elite controllers, saying, oh, they're not as good, whatever, yada yada yada. You know, this, that, and the others were better. Oh, I just switched back to the old controllers. I'm gonna grab something real quick here. Here we go. This is the analog stick from a Xbox 360 controller, right here. You tell me the difference? It's because there is none. Well, it's about 10 years older, and a few of the processes areas are slightly different. As you can see right here, this one's got some kind of metal pin up top. This one doesn't have that. Other than that, I can't really find any difference whatsoever between these. Microsoft has been using these same analog sticks in all of their controllers for over a decade now. They've been reliable sticks, as good as any other. And take a look at this board real quick. See this thing, what? Again, what a cheap out. Look at this material that we've got on this board. Just totally fucking cheap. Just a cheap, shitty board. And then we've got, of course, we've got our flat connections right here. This is pretty much a standard type of connections. You'll find these in TV remotes, controllers, that sort of thing. They've negated that these type of switches on the D-pad, which is right here, and they've gone for a flat profile, straight on the board tactile switch. Just a generic tack switch right here. Just like that. They come in all shapes and sizes, different buttons. This is what you'd really like to see on this. This is what would be more reliable. But again, if they would have put these tack switches in there, it would have cost an entire extra penny to make these controllers. Total fucking penny scrape. And yeah, I know, you make a million of them. Eventually, you know, those 2 cents, that 3 cents, that extra 5 cents, it adds up. But, you know, these are $50 controllers, and then we're talking about this Elite controller, which is, you know, $150. It's absolutely ridiculous. Let's look at one more thing under here. I showed this on my disassembly video, but right here labeled SO1, SO2, SO3, SO4, SO5, SO6, SO7, SO8, and we get a plus minus, plus minus, plus minus. Anyways, on both sides we get all that. Those are for each corresponding rumble motors. These are straight wired to the board, which is a bit unprofessional, especially, you know, very unorthodox to see something like that from a large company like Microsoft, to just straight wire these onto a circuit board, you'd expect to see some kind of connector. What you'd really expect to see is just like this, a ribbon cable with a flat profile connector. That's what you want to see in a product like this. But again, total fucking penny scrape. So let's get into my speculation, thoughts, and stuff like that. So the main feature of this controller is the paddles on the bottom. We've got 4 unassigned buttons here, which can be programmed to anything, and of course any of the buttons around the controller can be programmed to whatever you want. But these are really the specific ones because they allow you to really program the buttons you want without having to take your thumbs off the sticks. This is the biggest selling point behind this controller. The problem with it is that first of all, they're very crowded down here, and they make it difficult to hold. They're kind of disruptive to regular gameplay. You also accidentally press them all the time while you're playing. I could not get the feel for 4 paddles. I put about 60 hours into 4 paddles and I could not get the feel for it. So I only use these front 2. So automatically right off the bat we've got half of our main feature in use, which is a pretty big bummer. But either way, it's super useful, and it's really nice to play with these 2 paddles, even just having 2 extra programmable buttons. That being said, you still set it down on an uneven surface, you set it down on a blanket, whatever, you accidentally press a button. The first time it's not a big deal, the next 8,000 times it gets pretty annoying. Interchangeable parts is a great idea. Problem is the magnetic, in practice it's really not that great. When you drop this, and you get a complete fucking yard sale everywhere. So these parts go this way, this way, this way. Usually you just pick them up, stick them back on, and you get no problems. Sometimes you end up looking for, a stick or a paddle for 10 minutes, and sometimes you lose a part for 5 months before it turns up. That being said, I've yet to actually lose any parts of this thing. Let's get into the hair triggers. Here are the hair triggers right here. That is off, this one is on, and of course they decrease the distance at which you have to pull the trigger to get it all the way down. Of course, the trigger can be electronically changed in the Xbox's software, so you don't have to worry about that. This is just a mechanical stop. Despite the fact that it does next to nothing aside from allow you to interpret what the trigger is doing into your brain more easily, it is a nice feature. The problem with it is, the biggest problem I have with it is this right here. So we pull the regular trigger. You can see we get a nice smooth pull with a soft pad at the end. You pull the hair trigger. Just super annoying to me. I can't use them just because of that clack. It annoys the absolute hell out of me. As far as the construction quality goes, overall construction quality, well, it speaks for itself. First of all, my grips are coming off too badly to even use these rear grips. Whoops. Or to even use these rear paddles. They don't click anymore because the grips have protruded too far to allow them to work. So if I did use them, I don't anymore. We'll get more into that in a minute, why this is happening and why this is a problem. But being a $150 controller marketed towards people who's going to use it, it's a pretty huge disappointment to see that these things just absolutely come off. Especially considering this elastomer material. I'm not sure what it is. It may be butylene rubber or just some kind of generic TPE. It's a really tough material in itself, but it just does not hold on to this controller well. Other than that, people have problems with their LB, RB buttons. As you can see, this controller right here, it's perfectly tuned. It's as good as they get. However, I still don't like the feel of them. Even though these ones are maintained really well, I still don't really like the feel of them. I really want them to be, just a little bit more specific. I'd like to see something like a mouse button click on these left and right buttons, at least for the Elite controllers. We'll take a look at the construction behind the left and right button here. As you can see, we have a symmetrical construction here, which is weird because people seem to have more problems with the left button. And if you look really closely here on mine, what you can see is my left side is actually starting to crack right there. And I'm not sure what causes this. but I could assume that maybe it has something to do with this sync button right here being closer to the left side. Again, I don't know for sure what it is that's causing that, but it is strange that the left side really seems to have the predominant issues. What I'd really like to see out of these paddles, rather than these paddles that actually protrude out like this, I'd really like to see buttons that are shaped more like this, that are flush, completely flush with the case. That way you can hold the controller without the extra buttons being disruptive to the way you like to hold it, to the ergonomics of the controller, but at the same time you get all the functionality of the extra buttons, and they wouldn't be difficult to press. Again, something, you know, fairly large like this, something fairly easy to get down, press down, but something that's not going to press itself when you set the controller down, when you set it down on an inconsistent surface, I think would be a lot better solution than the paddles. As far as these hair triggers are concerned, easy. There's a little stopper inside the controller that stops these. It's plastic that rams against more plastic. Put a pad on it. So the last thing I want to talk about is the price point of this controller. They're $150. When this controller was announced, $150, people just about shit themselves. But they started to get their hands on it. People swore by it, said it was the best controller, said it was absolutely worth it. Is it worth $150? No. Will you buy it again? Yes. Yeah, I would buy it again just because I am absolutely 100% used to even just having these two paddles. And I hate to say that, and I hate the fact that I would buy it again, but I would. This is a $90 controller. It's priced $150 because Microsoft has a fantastic market research data team, and they know what you'll pay for it.